Hello, so you want to make a tower defense game in GameMaker Studio 2? Well, you've come to the right place. This is going to be a multiple part tutorial series. We're going to cover all sorts along the way. In this first part, we are going to create our monsters, get our room sorted and ready, and we're going to draw a path to get our monsters to walk along. That's what we're going to cover in this part, and then in the next part we will be moving on to, say, creating our towers, getting some more game mechanics in our game. So let's get started. First thing we're going to do is make a project. Let's get this open. Gonna call this Tower Defense Tutorial. Okay, so we've got our brand new project open. First thing we need to do is get our room sorted, our game level. So let's go into our room over here, and I want to change the dimensions of this somewhat. So we're going down to our properties over here. I want the room to be 640 by 360. It's a good 16 by 9 aspect ratio. It's quite common for widescreen monitors, TVs, to use this ratio. So 640 by 360, and if we run that, the screen should look, it's tiny. So we're gonna change this so that the actual window that we play in is gonna be double this size. So let's we want to create a viewport to do that, and the camera. So enable viewports over here, go to viewport 0, make it visible. So here you can see that's the viewport we've got at the moment. The camera is the white line, so we'll make that the same as our room size, which was 640 by 360. And the viewport is going to be the actual window itself, how big the window is. So we'll just make that double, which is 1280 by 720. So now whenever we run it, it's going to be much bigger, much more playable. But all of our assets are going to be like little small things that we can place in this tiny little room. So that's good, we've got that all sorted. Okay, so let's change the background color here as well. So I want to make it, I don't know, a light peachy pink kind of color. Let me just find something that really tickles my fancy. There, I like that. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is, as it's going to be a tower defense game, one of the key parts is that the monsters are going to walk along a path. So I want to draw that path and get that all sorted. So the way I'm going to draw this is I'm going to create a sprite, which is just like a white square, and then I'll literally just draw a square over here, and I'll show you how to do that. So let's make a sprite. We'll call it SPR path. And then I'll go into it, use the fill tool, and just make it all white. And I'm gonna make it a little bit transparent as well, just because then it will sort of blend into the background a little bit, so it's not quite so shocking when you look at it. Okay, so that's ready. Now go back to the room, and in order to just draw a sprite, oh, I've just put that in the background. I didn't mean to do that. Control Z. In order to draw a sprite, see I'm in instances layer, that's also not going to work. I need to make an assets layer, which is this one over here, and then I can draw, or I can place sprites in here. But if I hold Alt, I can like draw. So I will just draw a path that goes from here, go down a little bit, and that's our path. So if I just click away, our monsters are going to walk along here. I'm going to move this down below the instances because I don't want this path to be I don't want the monsters to be behind it, I want them to be on top of it. So make sure over here, the instances where the monsters are going to be is on top of the assets. And the assets is just the path. So I can rename this to be like path, but that's actually going to get a little bit confusing because we're going to do something else which is a little bit fancy to make sure that we can actually use this path. And what we're going to do is use the paths resource over here. So basically what this is going to do, just drawing this, our objects that we make aren't going to, they can't like register this sprite drawing that we've got. They can however register the path. So let's create a path, and this looks a little bit confusing, but don't worry, the only thing we want to do here is name the path, and I'll call it path 1. Maybe you would add more paths to your game eventually, but we're not going to for now. Now let's go back into the room, and we're going to make what's called a path layer, which is just beside this assets layer, a path layer. Doesn't really matter where this is. And what you can do with the path layer is over here, you can select a path. So if we select the one that we've just made, path 1, then we can like draw points on here. So if we follow the path that we've drawn, and I've got the grid on here so that the path points snap to it. If it's not on, they will just go anywhere along the path. Let's get rid of those. Turn the grid back on. And it's a 16 by 16 grid, which and then this is 32 by 32, so it all lines up quite nicely. And it also works quite well with this aspect ratio, especially width-wise anyway. It's not quite perfect on the height here, but that's fine. Okay, so let me finish drawing this path all the way along, and I'm gonna draw it going off the screen just a little bit, because whenever the monsters spawn, they're gonna spawn over here, and I want it to look like they're walking on. So you want them to spawn completely and then walk on rather than like spawning here. Oops, I've drawn another point. Okay, so we've drawn a path with a sprite, then we have created a path resource, and we have drawn that path onto the room in a path layer. So let's create a monster, a little enemy, and get him moving along this path. So I'm gonna draw him over here. We'll call this SBR monster. And then let's go in here. I'm gonna make it a 16 by 16 monster actually. So let's go into here, change the size to 16 by 16. Okay, so now I'm gonna draw it. Gonna make him orange, why not? And he's gonna have a bit of a really simple walking animation. You'll see what he's gonna look like here. Okay, so this is literally the shape of our little guy. And I'll fill him in with like a slightly lighter color. Give him a couple eyes, why not? Okay, so here's the little dude, and then he's gonna have literally like on this frame, we'll just lift this leg up and fix this so it doesn't look quite so weird. And then if we just select all of this, copy, now we have it up here, we can like draw this. So if I make a new frame, and then if I use this tool, this is the mirror brush tool. So now it's the other way around. And I can just paste that, and now it has like a That's kind of crazy when you do that, but if I change the speed, kind of looks like he's walking. No, I don't like that at all. Okay, let me change how I've done that. Okay, so instead of selecting all of that, I'm just going to select this. And it's literally going to be like that. And then I'm going to do the same thing, reverse it, and do that. So now, that's his walking animation. It's really simple, but that'll do. Now we need to make an object for this monster. I'll call it object monster. Give him his new sprite. And we want to get this monster walking along the path. And it's really easy to do that using this path that we've created. So whenever a monster spawns, they're going to immediately spawn here. We're going to force them to spawn here and walk along this path. So that means in the create events, that's where we're going to do all of this code. So we want to use a function called path start. And down at the bottom, there's a couple inputs we need to write down. So the path is path 1. So that's the path that we're going to start. The speed, this is how fast we're going to move along it. And the speed here works very similar to like the speed built-in instance variable. There's also a path speed built-in instance variable, and you can change this as your monster's walking along the path, and that will change how quickly they're moving. But you just need to remember that you need to change path speed and not speed. So we can give them, I don't know, let's say speed of 5 to begin with. The next one is end action. Now if I middle click here to open up the documentation, the end action is what the monster is going to do when it gets to the end of the path. And if you scroll down, here are the options. So we can choose between these 4 things. You can either stop at the end of the path, you can restart, so it'll jump to the beginning again. You can continue from the current position, or you can reverse, so it would start going back the path. We're just gonna say stop. What's actually gonna happen when they reach the end of the path is like your player will lose lives and then you'll just destroy the monster. For now, we'll just say path action stop because you need to tell it to do something here. And where were we? In the workspace, in the create event for the monster object. So the end action we want to use, I need to see what it actually was. Path action stop. Path action stop. Cool. And then the last thing, absolute. So the absolute means that if it's true, it's either true or false. So if it's true, no matter where you spawn a monster, it's going to force it to immediately spawn up here and walk along here. But if absolute was false, then all of these things would start walking in this shape, but starting from wherever they already are. I think that's pretty, that makes sense. So we want it to be true, we want absolute to be true so that they all start up here. So we'll just set that to be true. And so let me place a monster in the room here. And then whenever we run this, he's gonna walk along here and you'll see that. Okay, so it's pretty quick. Let's slow that down. Don't know what speed to use, maybe like 2. That was super fast. Okay, so even that's pretty fast. But look at him go. He's doing it. I'll change it to 1. That's good. That's a sensible speed, I think. gives you enough time to like actually think. Okay, so now we don't actually want to be placing the monsters in the room like this. One issue is the fact that they would all be on top of each other. You want them to come in like one after the other, and it will change depending on your level, blah blah blah. So we're going to create an object that's going to spawn the monsters. So let's create an object monster spawner. Rename that obj monster spawner. And it will not use a sprite, it's going to be invisible. We do want to make sure it's in the room. It doesn't matter where, it can literally go anywhere. So this is our monster spawner here. What we want to do is, firstly in the create event, we want to decide how many monsters we're going to spawn, and we want to decide like the timing between spawning monsters. So let's say mobs to spawn, or enemies to spawn, or I'm just going to say mobs to spawn. And let's say we're just going to spawn 5 monsters. And then we want the spawn delay, so this is the time between each monster spawning, equals, and say we want it to be 2 seconds. We will say room speed times 2. Oops, room speed with an underscore times 2. So this is going to be 2-second delay between the monster spawning. The last thing is we're going to use an alarm, and the alarm is actually going to spawn the monsters. So whenever we create this, we want to basically spawn, for now, we want to spawn a monster immediately. So we're going to immediately call the alarm. So I'm just going to say alarm 0 equals 1. And this means 1 frame. So in 1 frame, after this is created, the alarm is going to be triggered. So let's go into the alarm. And here, whenever the alarm is called, you're spawning a monster if mobs to spawn, if there are still mobs to spawn. And then every time you spawn one, you're going to decrease the mobs to spawn by 1. So if mobs to spawn is more than 0, then we want to spawn a monster, and to do that we'll use instance create layer, and here you need the X, the Y, the layer, so the X and Y of where you want to spawn the monster and what layer you want to put them in the room, which layer here. So obviously it's going to go in the instances layer, and then the object that you want to spawn. So because we've used this code for the path, it doesn't matter the X and Y where we put them, because it's going to force them onto that path. So we can just say X and Y, and this refers to the X and Y of the spawner object, but it's just a nice easy way to just fill out this this code. And then also for the layer, you can write layer, and again that's just going to use the layer that the spawner object is on. And then lastly, what do we want to spawn? A monster. So object monster. And we want to make sure that we decrease mobs to spawn by 1. Mobs to spawn minus equals 1. And then we want to reset the alarm for 2 seconds. So for that little delay. So alarm 0 equals spawn delay. Because remember, this is room speed times 2. Room speed times 2. Room speed is 1 second, by the way, and it calculates it based on your FPS that you've set. So I'm pretty sure my game is at 60 FPS, this game that we're making here. You can change that in the options. I'm fairly sure. Let's see. Main games, game frames per second. Its default is 30, but if you change it to 60 here, just once, then it's always going to be 60 by default. Cool. Close these up and then go back in here. So back in the alarm here, and then whenever this gets to 0, then this line of code isn't going to be triggered, so your alarm's not going to be triggered over and over as well, and you'll stop spawning monsters. So let's run that and see if our monsters are walking along the path. Amazing, there you go. So already the game looks like a tower defense game. Well, I mean, kind of. Like if you saw this, you would know exactly what was going to happen, at least. One other thing I want to give us, which will help us whenever we're making the game here, is I want to be able to restart the room just by pressing a button. I'll use the R, the letter R, and I'll put this code into the monster spawner because it's always going to be in the room, so we'll always be able to use it. So if I go into events, and there's lots of events down here, if we say key pressed, go down to letters, R, and we'll just give it a little sort of title. This is to restart the room. And you just use the code room restart. So now if I run this, then I can like reset the room whenever I want. Very useful whenever you're testing a new mechanic or anything at all. If I press R, restarts. So that's basically it for this beginning tutorial. Gonna move on next time to making the actual towers, getting them to shoot at our monsters, and also give the monsters some health and make sure that they like die whenever they're shot at by the towers. So hopefully this is useful, hopefully it's interesting, and if you want to keep on going, then look out for the next video, part 2.